All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Grow Rogue podcast. Today, I'm joined by Dave Vanderjagt. Dave, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you being on.
Yeah, glad to be here, Reade. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, man. So for people that do not know who you are, can you give us like the quick rundown, the quick couple of minute explainer for who you are, what you do, and like the problem that you've set out to solve in the world?
Yeah, well, I think that those problems are changing as the world changes, I think. So that's a bit of a moving target, but man, maybe we can talk a little bit about that today. First and foremost, I'm a father to a 4 and an 8-year-old boy, two boys, I should say. They're amazing. We're super active. Coach all the sports, and that's a big part of my life on a daily basis. And then, secondly, I'm a fractional CRO. I also do a lot of revenue operations, or as we lovingly call it, RevOps leadership work with different organizations that are looking to structure their business within their revenue team for growth. And so that takes on different forms, but I typically do that work for companies that are B2B in nature, selling to other businesses, and they tend to be somewhere between 5 and 20 million in revenue.
Very cool, man. So me and you we're like hovering around the exact same, life stages in a couple of different ways. And I say hovering around because I've got a 10 and a 7-year-old boys, and they're in sports. I mean, we're overlapping like 2 different sports seasons, which means 2 playing baseball and 2 starting basketball right now. And I'm coaching all 4 of those teams, right? So, I mean, I get the struggle, right? Like, and the fun, right? It's so much fun. So, it's fun, but it's exhausting. And then separately, we are both kind of in that RevOps, sales and marketing, depending on like, I think, it's, to me, it's an industry thing, or it's even like a more modern term. I think there's sometimes they can be used interchangeably, and sometimes they're very, very different, right? Sometimes, RevOps and, sales or marketing would consider themselves to be totally different departments. For the folks at home, for the folks who maybe don't understand what the difference, how would you define and maybe differentiate RevOps from like the traditional, sales and marketing departments?
Yeah, when we're talking companies of this size too, a lot of times this role is absorbed into other roles. Sometimes it's absorbed into your operations role or your operations lead. Depends on if they have revenue process or just revenue operations experience specifically. Typically, ops is more focused on delivering the product. How do we invoice the product, like some of the systems tech, maybe even like the people and org chart structure that sort of focuses on like, how do we just deliver this thing, this service, this product that we have. The revenue operations, I think in our context here is more about like the systems and the processes primarily, although I've seen RevOps roles where and I should say actually the data as well. I've even seen RevOps leaders that get pretty involved in the org chart as well, specifically within the marketing, sales, and client success or account management organizations. So that's a little bit of like how I define it today. So like examples there would be, what are the processes that are followed? Like what is our entire buyer and customer journey, right? So pre-purchase, post-purchase. How does that work? What is marketing's role in that? What is sales role? What is post-sales? Maybe depending on how you're structurally set up, perhaps your sales team owns the relationship with the customer, or perhaps they hand that off to an account manager or a customer success, client success type individual. But those processes, how well are they documented? How well is that playbook written? How well are those processes understood? How are they, like, how have we built training around them? How is their process adherence or accountability measured? How do those actually mirror inside of our CRM or whatever marketing and sales automation softwares that we use, especially the ones that could be customer facing? And then from a data and a tech or a system standpoint, like what is that tech stack? Typically, RevOps has a pretty strong hand in that. And then how ultimately, as we start to grow, especially if we have aspirations to scale, how are we structuring our data? What kind of architecture? What kind of governance? How do we use data to make better decisions? Obviously to throw in the buzzword, but like how is AI as part of the systems and data helping us move forward in a better direction, or understanding when we launch new products or services or launch new markets or build new teams, how are we measuring the efficacy of each of those? So, in my opinion, there's probably a lot more than that too. Obviously I didn't really touch on reporting, which is sort of implied in data, but like how do we measure metrics, KPIs, and all of that kind of work just to overall understand how well does the revenue engine work in our team. And your RevOps person, I feel like, is the engineer that needs to go to work, kind of greasing, the gears in each of those places, or sometimes rebuilding the thing. But it's less about like the day to day of slinging the next marketing campaign or the next sale, or managing or coaching the salesperson or sales team, or managing or coaching the customer success team, or doing quarterly business reviews or whatever. Like it's really about just like, how do we help each of those functions do their job better, and then also how do we make sure that we're getting good data from each of those functions as well.
I got it. And so, I mean, the way I think about this is that there's almost, rather than being different, different pieces of the puzzle, there's almost like layers, right? There's a sales and marketing layer, right? And then there's that RevOps layer that's maybe on top, or the other way around, whatever. But those things together are kind of built. And now it sounds like that RevOps, it covers other. So another way to look at it is like a Venn diagram, right? So like there's some overlap, but there's also some things that are totally different, and it probably overlaps with other departments as well. So that's a really good explanation. So the fractional piece of this, this is a rising role, I would say. We've done some fractional CMO work, and so I generally understand it. Who needs a fractional, really in any type of, CXO role, but like who needs a fractional CRO?
Yeah. So typically, I mean, any company candidly could use a fractional CRO. I think you see it as a fractional C-level executive, more specifically boiling it down into just the revenue side. So like you mentioned, CMO, CRO, I've seen CSOs or fractional VPs of sales. You'll see fractional revenue operations, becoming, I think it's a kind of growing area. Candidly, it's the folks that can't really, or don't really, can't afford the full-time person, or don't really need the full-time person. If you're in a place where you're like, well, I've got a 50%, I need 50% of a revenue operations person, but I also need 50% of a CM right now. Look like finding your options are either, well, I'll find a CMO that hopefully can do RevOps, or I'll find a RevOps person that hopefully can fill in as a CMO. Chances are pretty good that they're going to be limited and not effective in one of those roles, right? Whichever is not their strength. So finding somebody that just can do the work, can integrate inside your team, day-to-day operations, and provide value, but from a fractional or part-time perspective, and also should be less, right, than a full-time W-2 employee. Certainly less from like a, kind of the HR hooks standpoint, right? Because typically we're talking contract, 1099, fairly loose, contract terms and things. So it's a low-cost, easy, fast, cheaper way to get somebody that's slotted in, that's very specifically focused on one area of your company, instead of trying to find the person to come in to wear multiple hats up front. So I'm not even advocating that a fractional is always the best solution. I think there are certainly situations sometimes where, for example, the executive team only is comfortable working with full-time employees. Like that's just the only kind of world that they know, and bringing somebody in fractionally actually kind of upsets that in an unproductive way. But going back, cheaper solution, narrowly focused on one area, can integrate obviously directly into the team, and provides you specialization on that one aspect. And perhaps, and then thinking more long-term, because that's usually the immediate pain, but like the longer term opportunity is sometimes that fractional can grow along with you as the company moves forward. Sometimes they fill that role for a particular period of time, and then they could take a step back. Maybe you kind of got a big mess in this area of your company and you need some cleanup, and it's going to take a little while to do it. I see that pretty often, especially in companies that are under $20 million. So come in, fix, structure, clean up, and then kind of step down maybe some of the engagement, which actually, which should help with your cash flow, theoretically. And then the last one I'll mention is you do see people come into these fractional roles for a period of time, and then they actually completely eject out. So they may help you find somebody, that is full time if there's enough need there, or they may roll what they're doing into another role, a full time role in the company. So I've seen all of these different ways where the fractional role evolves, but really the key piece is: do you need somebody to slot in quickly? Do they need to know their stuff? Do they probably need some level of specialization? And is it affordable versus going through a 3 to 6 month hiring process? So if those things tend to be true, chances are a fractional C level could be a good option for you.
Okay, so I'm with you on that, and I tend to think that the team does benefit when there are maybe some more specialized skill sets in the room, especially at a leadership level, right? A lot of times what you see at a leadership level is a handful of like generalists with a lot of experience, and then they are kind of giving orders down to specialists, and that can create some challenges, right? Because to me, it's a really difficult thing to try to delegate or task and give an area of responsibility to somebody when there's not a lot of understanding of what you're actually asking for. And so to have some folks in that C-level discussion who have a very specific focus, I think can be a tremendous benefit. What I think can be a challenge, the other side of that coin, is sometimes you get too many people in the room, right? Because you got a fractional CRO over here, you've got a fractional CFO over here, you've got in our case, sometimes we're just there as like a digital marketing consultant or something like that. You've got, the agency that's doing stuff. How do you keep from the room getting too crowded, or from there being too many opinions, or, what is your process, if you will, for making sure that it stays as peaceful and cohesive as possible in that, exec boardroom, if you will?
Yeah, I think so. I actually had a client that was very much like what you just described. If you looked at the entire leadership team, it was fractional HR, fractional sales, fractional marketing, fractional CFO, maybe even missing one or two others, that were in the room as well. And then there was like a sales leader that was full time, and the CEO that was full time. The CEO wasn't full time either because unfortunately I was going through some health issues. So in that room, I think there's pros and cons. And again, I don't know that I would like throw the baby out with the bathwater here and say it's all bad. It's all good, right? But to explore some of those things, I think a key piece of making that work, especially in the short term, is the structure and the scope and the expectations that you as the company that's hired or put these fractional leaders into your company, how well you've done at understanding your needs and making sure that the person that the fractional executive that you put into that role knows exactly what they need to go accomplish. They're very clear on their role. They're very clear on milestones. They're very clear on deliverables. They're very clear on expectations. So they show up to meetings. They make sure that the work is getting done. They make sure that key deliverables or milestones are being hit, and they're showing up on the day to day. If you kind of haphazardly throw, even in my opinion, even like C-level fractionals into a company, you may start strong, but eventually you're going to kind of be wondering like, all right, well, like what am I paying for this person for 10, 15, 20, 25 hours a week? So key there, just the scope, the expectations, and some structure. And I think if you do that, actually, you could be effective for quite some time. Eventually, though, the culture of your company that kind of rolls downhill off the executive team, you're not going to get a lot of that, right? Like you're not going to necessarily build strong culture by having an entirely fractional team, because those folks are only spending probably a minority, percentage of their overall time with you every week. So it is hard to kind of build some of those key, like that cultural nucleus, right? That identifies the operating beliefs, core values, all the things, all the good things, that come out of like building a company. That's probably difficult. And I would just say in general, like at the end of the day, when it's a good marriage, as like from a full-time employee and the company doing the hiring, like it's a marriage that's like you're committed for hopefully some longer period of time. When you're a fractional, most fractional engagements, they may have like an initial contract term, like I see 6 months, 12 months. Those are kind of the common ones. Typically, even then, there's 30-day out clauses, sometimes 60-day out clauses in these contracts. The point I'm making is you're not really getting married, and it's contractually sort of like shown that you're not getting married. Now, on the fractional side, that's also the encouragement. That's the motivation to go deliver every month, because if you don't, then it's pretty easy to pull the string, and then you don't have that client, right? You don't have that contract, you don't have that revenue or income stream anymore. But on the flip side, it does kind of promote a bit of like a transactional nature in terms of that relationship. So again, you're getting people that are operating to like the next month and the next month and the next month. Whereas perhaps if you're doing things more like long term and you're hiring W-2s, full-time equivalents, they're thinking about 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, because they're not really worried about am I going to have a job, or is my contract going to be available next month or not. Like, they're pretty sure that they're going to keep going, right? Like, they've got some term in place, right? And usually you don't just get haphazardly fired, usually, right? But so those are just some of like the nuances. I think that it's not a good or a bad thing. There are pros and cons to both. I think just understanding where you sit around how you think about fractionals, how many of them you have, who you have, how well structured their engagements are, and what that means to the long-term goals of the company, even just looking out 3 to 5 years. And is this the right team that's going to help take us there? Those are some of the things that I would be considering if I was a CEO looking at building out a team of fractional executives.
That's good, and I can appreciate that answer, because it's not necessarily self-serving, right? I mean, if a person hears that, they might think, well, maybe we don't want a fractional CRO, or maybe we don't want a fractional CMO. I think that's the truth, right? Sometimes we have advised potential clients like, hey, I don't know that we are right for you, because it seems like what you need is A, B, or C.
Yep.
And then sometimes we'll actually bow out at a certain point, because we'll acknowledge like, hey, looks like the team is rounding out, and I think you've got the talent and the skill base on your current team to be able to do the things we're doing. And I think that actually establishes a ton of trust and goodwill, and that usually results in good things down the road. I mean, it has for us a number of times. I want to go a couple of different directions, but one of them, let's go like tactical if we can. In that space that you're dealing with, and you can choose like an industry focus if you want, if you have, but what are the things that you are dealing with most often right now? Time of recording, we're in Q4 2025. We're moving into most of our clients are already like kind of done with the year, right? They're fully planning on 2026. So what are you guys helping them to figure out right now?
Yeah, the big thing right now with everybody is forecasting, right? So typically being driven by your finance or your CFO team, but like trying to figure out, all right, we have, in most cases, I'll say this applies to every company, but especially in the kind of companies that I work with, which tend to be bootstrapped, not funded. So, what are we going to do with our limited cash next year? Where are we going to spend for growth? What are our growth objectives? Do we have have we been on a path with like a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan? Is there an exit that's planned ahead of time, right? Like, what are the very high level goals in terms of whomever has equity as part of the cap table? Like, what are they trying to accomplish with this thing? Everything has to kind of start there. So I think you actually kind of start with what progress did we make in 2025? How has that looked over the last few years? Is that taking us further toward what the vision that we have for the company, or is it taking us further away from that? And if it's anything other than taking us toward it, then what difficult decisions may we have to make, as we look ahead to 2026 and beyond? Then I think kind of step 2 is, all right, well then CFO is now saying, okay, well, growth and vision goals may be adjusted on these. So financially, that means that we need to be, we're going to need to be kind of in this space. And then it kind of rolls to the next, I think many times, sort of next level of leadership, which oftentimes is the CRO or whoever has the CRO hat. Sometimes the CEO, for what it's worth, is also the CRO and managing the sales and marketing team, especially in those sub $20 million companies. but then it becomes, okay, how are we going to accomplish these things? And again, do we have the right team? Do we have if they run on EOS, just the EOS terminology, do we have the right butts in the right seats? Do we have open seats that we're looking to fill? Strategically, how do those fit in? If those have been open for a while, like what assumptions are there? Like you're really trying to look at, again, like limited resources, limited cash, and where can I spend it, and how should I plan for that in the coming year? So things are really ramping up significantly right now in terms of forecasting for next year, and then starting to break that down into, for example, if you're managing the sales team, you're looking at individual quotas, perhaps team quotas, territories. Maybe you're doing some territory reassignments. Perhaps you've had some headcount churn in your team, so you're kind of redesigning where your team is focused, depending on how your sales team is segmented or structured. Again, like all the same things that operationally you're always working through, of like getting new people onboarded, like open recs and filling those, as well as like what other big kind of swings are we going to be trying to make in the next year around tech, systems, perhaps other third-party support agencies, all of those things. So holistically trying to understand how do we get to where we're going, make sure we're still on track or continue to grow, and get ourselves back on track. It's a pretty large undertaking, but that's what's happening right now.
I'm curious, what was something surprising that you learned in 2025 that you will either be, will cause you to be doing a lot more or less of something in 2026?
Was it surprising? Is that what you said?
Yeah, what was something surprising? Maybe you didn't expect to see happen, or you didn't expect to work, or that you didn't expect would or wouldn't work, or something like that.
Yeah. I think, it's not a complete surprise, but I think it's just amazing to watch how AI is evolving, particularly the revenue team and the revenue space. Seeing companies that have literally cut half of their marketing, sales, CS teams and just replace them with AI agents. By the way, for what it's worth, none of them can conclusively say whether it's working well or it's accomplishing what they want yet. But we probably will find that out in the next, I'll say in 2026. I think a lot of that data, that scoreboard, if you will, around is this stuff actually working or not, or is it working I think the real question is going to be, is it, to what extent is it working, and to what extent is it not working, right? And so finding where the limitations are, but then those lines keep getting pushed out further, right? Like more and more, what AI can do to, in some ways, replace aspects of what traditionally took somebody like a human body to actually accomplish. I think you're going to still, continue to see that pushed out. So actually seeing bodies not being replaced and being replaced with AI agents this year is probably just the most surprising thing. And it's not like in 2024 we kind of said this is coming, but just to still see it happen is remarkable.
Yeah, I think that the big question of 2026 is going to be what you just alluded to, which is did all that work, right? Like, did we overreact? Did we underprepare for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was that something that, because there's been, and I think I know which camp I'm in on this one, right? But there's one camp that thinks, well, this is the biggest change to the economy since the smartphone, which I think which may be underselling. It might be the biggest change to the economy since the internet, which I think it's somewhere in between those two.
Sure.
And then the other camp is like, well, is this something that will eventually become, I don't think it's going to be like, what were the things people were spending all that money on, like the pictures of apes and stuff like that? What was that? What were they called? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
It was not. It was like it wasn't a crypto thing. Oh my goodness, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about as soon as I can remember the name of it. But it was like digital art. And people were spending all this money on it. Anyway, it just went.
Yeah, what was that about?
You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Figure it out. I'm gonna pop it up on screen. But there's the camp that thinks it's that, which I think they're out of their minds. But where is it going to be on that spectrum, right? Is this going to be something where, you know what? At the end of the day, AI turns out it's really best as a productivity tool, right? Or is it something that's transformational to almost every business that it touches eventually? And I say eventually because we've worked in some industries where, you know, mobile first digital experiences did not really hit them until like the late 2010s, which was, you know, a really slow adoption, right? I think like insurance and financial services, right? And then even today, a lot that are in, you know, we even have some clients who most of their website traffic is still on, you know, people are visiting from desktop computers, right? Which in 2013, the prediction was, oh, in 10 years, no one's going to be using a desktop computer anymore. All of your internet usage is going to be from a mobile device, something like that. Well, that didn't happen. So I'm just so curious, you know, when it settles, right? When the flood is done, what's the new waterline going to be with AI? Is it going to be something that like, yep, it's a part of almost everything we do, but we are still heavily reliant on people to ultimately execute? Or are we actually sitting in a room with like people managers and like 90% of what's under them on the org chart is some form of agent or, you know, automation? I don't know. And I don't even know that that's not really a question, Dave. I just kind of throw that out there, you know, to get your response to something like that.
Yeah, it's a good question, man. We could probably talk a long time on it. I think, you know, as I look at how AI has been implemented inside companies, right? I think that the short answer is yes, it will be everywhere in some way, shape, or form. I think the thing that doesn't get talked about though as much is we talk about the tech. Like everybody loves to talk about the tech. It's kind of easy to talk about the tech, candidly. What's hard and what's really, in my opinion, is a lot harder to predict is how does human behavior change? Like let's say on the recipient end, right? Like knowing that AI is driving more of this. To give you an example, right? Today, theoretically, you should be able to write better email copy that's more compelling than ever because you're using AI agents to do all the research and to look up the person and write stuff that's compelling. And I'll tell you, I spend the least amount of time looking at what's in my inbox than I ever have in my entire life. So theoretically, everything should be getting better, but I spend less time. My behavior is changing as well while the AI, the quote unquote, the AI is transforming. I'm also changing. Like, so what to me is a little bit more interesting than talking about how great AI is to actually talk about like maybe like the anthropological effects of how human behavior will change, both on like the receiving and the giving end, if you will, of this whole AI transformation. Like none of that will be stagnant. Like everything will be changing, but we like to talk about the tech because I think honestly, candidly, it's a hell of a lot easier to be like, well, AI is going to do all these things, right? That's pretty binary in most places. But figuring out how people's behavior is going to change as a result of that, that's something that is talked about very little, and candidly, nobody really knows. At least not that I've heard.
All right, so I am frantically looking up the term that I just came across the other day. Who Anti-Fragile? Who wrote the book Anti-Fragile? It was Nassim Nicholas Taleb on Substack. I believe it was him who I just was reading an article from him on Substack. It's called The World in Which We Live. And so what he talks about is, let's see, what was the term? I'm going to find it. But what he described was there are changes that happen, right? And everybody can see the technological or the cultural change. They can see what happens. And then there's an interpolation or an extrapolation of that change that is predicted, right? They'll predict, okay, well, this is changing, and so these are the natural next order actions of that change.
Yeah.
But what he was proposing was that by seeing that, we are actually changing what the reaction to it is going to be. And one example he gave was, you know, if somebody says, Vanderjagt Co. stock is about to blow up. You're going to make a ton of money if you buy now in Vanderjagt Co. stock. Well, by the time people start doing that, the opportunity for profit on that growth is now dissipated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just by people reacting to that, it actually diminishes the value of purchasing that, right? Because if I'm the 297,000th person to hear that bit of information, that bit of news, and I go buy, well, I'm not going to make a lot of profit because it's now raised the price.
Sure. Yep.
And so the change that's coming from, say, AI, you're right. The extrapolation of that was that the content that we get to read and consume on a daily basis is going to be so much richer and deeper and better, because what used to take a team of researchers and editors and weeks of writing can now be done in an afternoon. Well, the change that the behavioral change from consumers of that is now that we don't perceive that piece of content is as valuable as it used to be, because it didn't have a team of researchers and it didn't take months of writing and editing. It took some guy an afternoon, and you know what? It all starts to look the same. So now, where the prediction was, get ready, digital content is about to blow up, it may actually do the opposite. This is all hypothetical, right? It may actually do the opposite, because the perception is that, well, now the quality is going down.
Yeah.
This is now a totally anecdotal. You gave an anecdotal experience, or your anecdotal experience. I'll give mine. I have found that more than ever, I have found so much more enjoyment and benefit and value out of reading physical books like biographies in order to learn business principles, leadership lessons, whatever. Just enjoy the reading. More so now than ever, because you know what? I don't even know that I can explain it. But when I just think like, I used to love to just read like a good long form article on like a blog.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I'm as drawn to that anymore. I just for whatever that perception my mind has created because of everything that's changed over the last couple of years, I now am thinking, you know what? How about this 400-page book? Maybe it's the pace. Part of me thinks it's even the pace. I get to slow down a little bit because I'm going to read about Thomas Jefferson, and I'm going to spend 20 plus hours learning about that. Super long-winded way of saying, like, I think you hit on something that is like spot on about there's no way to know exactly what the future reaction and zeitgeist change is going to happen because of AI. I think it points to, and this is what I want to ask you about, what I think is the most valuable skill for today, tomorrow, and the next 50 years is adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
How well and how effectively and how quickly can you adapt to a change in technology, change in culture, change in the way of doing things? That will determine your success.
Yeah, I agree, man. I agree. I think you hit on a couple things there. But talking about the adaptability one, I've in several of the clients that I've worked with some folks that are kind of nearing the age of retirement. So we talk about learning a new skill set or learning this new kind of AI thing. That can be a little intimidating. So, and I won't say universally, there are certainly exceptions, but in general, if I'm in the latter state, let's say 5 years or less of my career, I'm like, well, do I have to learn this to ride the wave and just be done? And the advice that I give is, it's not just, AI is not obviously going to be just in the business world. It's going to affect your personal world as well. But I also don't love like the kind of scare tactic marketing sort of that comes around AI, which is, you better learn this or you're going to be left behind. You better do this or X, bad thing, either missed opportunity or just bad thing happens to you. Just my recommendation to those folks, and the thing I'll stand by today, is just do a little bit, just poke around, carve out 5 minutes a day, carve out 15 minutes few times a week, right? Just spend some time digging in, play around with the tool, right? Like, you don't need to be an expert overnight, but this is definitely going to be here to stay. And you don't want to be completely left behind, but it's not a drinking out of the fire hose moment for most of us either, right? Just start learning, start understanding some of the fundamentals, start playing with some of the tools, like get yourself comfortable. Like that's probably enough for the masses. And I've given that advice to some folks, like I said, kind of in the later stages of their career. And I think it helped them just like process like, oh, okay, this isn't this might be the next big thing, right? And it appears that it is, but I don't have to spend 50 hours next week trying to figure out what AI means to me or how this is going to transform. Just do a little bit, right? Just do a little bit, bite-sized chunks, and I think you're going to be just fine. The other thing that I thought you brought up, which is really, really interesting, and actually gets around to some of the books and the reading that you're doing, is that like every time we go through AI, in a sense, if you kind of rise up above the fact that it's a technological shift, it's probably not that unique. Meaning, like you called out at the beginning of the podcast, I think, the rise of the smartphone, right? Like the computer. I mean, just think about like all these other changes. Like if you want to understand perhaps where this is going to go, at least from a principled perspective, go look at some of these other just major changes, and then look at not what the change was, but how it changed human behavior as a result. You'll probably come a little closer to more meaningful understanding of what this is, likely to look like, just based on the principle of it, rather than what AI specifically does. And so I think there's probably, it's making me think, kind of want to go spend some time in that space. Follow the principles, right? Look at over time how these things happen. They happen actually relatively frequently, probably once a decade or every couple decades for sure. And look at like how it changed things. And therein is probably going to give you a lot more clarity as to like what this may look like versus what does AI technically or tactically specifically do, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you. We had a great guest on one of the last episodes I recorded. Actually, it was with a guy by the name of John Corsick, and he's he's a veteran in business. We'll say that, and what he advised, because he was talking about the older Gen Xers and maybe some of even the boomers that are still in business. His encouragement was, or his recommendation was an encouraging note to your point, which is you don't have to be an expert in every new thing that happens in order to be relevant. Mm-hmm. And when I talk about adaptability, I don't mean mastery necessarily, because as soon as you master a new technology, it's maybe not quite as relevant anymore, right? I mean, I think there's a ton of, my list of subscriptions and software apps that I've used is like an elephant graveyard of retired apps and platforms that I thought was just going to take over and be the new thing. And I get emails all the time from this app or that app that was like, hey, we're shutting down, and it stinks, but it's like, oh, well, that was surprising. But the adaptability piece is, can you commit to just like learning a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. And just continuing to learn, continuing to, deepen your knowledge and have that willingness to learn from somebody you may not have expected to learn from. So I've weirdly, I was like always the young guy in the room. You've probably experienced this too, right? Being kind of like a more modern, a business person, right? Who's done a lot of stuff on your own. I'm just guessing, but, being a millennial and all those things. Well, I was in a meeting the other day, and there was a young man who was of the Gen Z, generation. And everybody was like looking at him and asking him questions because we're trying to figure out recruiting Gen Z salespeople, right? That was kind of the challenge, right? Okay. And I was just thinking, I was like, this is great. It was kind of strange for me because like I'm not the young guy in the room anymore. I've had to get used to that over the last few years. But that was not happening 10 years ago. They were not looking at me and asking me. They had me in the room and begrudgingly because I understood something they didn't understand. So just seeing this shift and, seeing a 58-year-old CEO and a 61-year-old president of the company, just like super willing to learn from this 24-year-old young person about, tell us about how your generation likes to, evaluate, potential employers and stuff. Now, all also being aware that when I was that age, the economy was not one where they were looking to add new people. We were having to fight and claw our way into the market. But just the willingness to adapt and to learn from people that you may not have expected that you could have learned from, I think will be a really valuable skill in the coming years. So.
Yeah. I got to believe at some level, right? You look back, right, several decades of, let's just talk about business in this context mostly, but I think you could say it applies to just life in general, right? And eventually you start to kind of have to chalk things up to, like, what's the fundamental here? Like, what's the print? Like, these things, like, there's always going to be a new thing, right? What's the next thing after AI? We're so obsessed with that. Nobody's even talking about what happens next. Like, but there will be another thing, right? And who knows how many years. What are like the really kind of fundamentals that sort of always apply, right? And I feel like if you can find some way of focusing on those, you're first of all, you're not going to get caught up in the hype. You're not going to have the FOMO. You're not going to have the scarcity mindset that's easy to kind of come up with as you're going through these big changes, and you kind of stay focused, and I think that's ultimately probably the healthiest way to sort of approach this stuff. But that's perspective as you get. Like, I just turned 40 back in August, so kind of in the next decade now, and those kind of principled sort of fundamentals seem to be more important than they ever have in all areas, business and otherwise.
Yeah, man, I think that is one of the best parts about kind of maturing in life and business is just, I feel like the perspective is just a bit zoomed out. And whereas when I was younger, everything was like, what can I make happen like now? And what needs to happen now? And there was so much pressure for the deadline to be today. And so zooming out a little bit, taking a little bit more of a measured and balanced approach to, life and business. I also think being a parent, you and I, we started the conversation with that. Being a parent, I think, helps in that, right? Because their life moves so fast, right? I mean, you look at pictures of your kids from like 3 years ago, and they're a different human, right? Your youngest is 4. 2 years ago, half their life ago, right?
Yeah.
So you just start to take a little bit of a different perspective and view on different things because, and I don't know, there's probably a name for that phenomenon, but I'm certainly glad for it. Dave, I want to be conscious of your time. I appreciate everything you've given us today. What is the best way for people to learn more about what you're doing, get in touch with you, and maybe work with you if they need to?
Yeah, it's two ways. Look me up on LinkedIn. It should be pretty easy to find, David Vanderjagt. And then my website, vanderjagtcro.com, and my contact information is there. So would love to engage with anyone. Love riffing on these kinds of things. So thanks so much for having me today, Reade. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being on, Dave. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps us to grow the channel and get more guests, awesome guests just like Dave. I appreciate y'all for being here, and I will see you on the next one.